Can you elaborate more on what you mean by critical academic judgment?
Yeah, the critical academic judgment. So obviously there is variation amongst all of us in how our joints are shaped and molded and the specific ways in which they move. But there are some commonalities that we can say. The ankle should be able to flex some 30 degrees. The hip should be able to rotate 45 degrees. There are basic certain biomechanical benchmarks that the majority of the body variation should fall into. Well, when you're someone like me who broke his back and started to have all of these movement disabilities and restrictions, when you can only move a hip to 5 degrees of rotation, you understand what the norm is, and you see where your body's at. There's this dissonance. There's this massive gap between your body's own capacity and academically what is described as the norm, where you should be at. And when you learn about the body and the art of movement, the science of movement through textbooks, you're taught these academic norms. This should happen when this movement occurs. We should move from the hip and the pelvis first. And then you start seeing that your body is very different and far away from what these textbooks and the academic norms are. It creates this immediate emotional disturbance of, this isn't good. This is bad. I'm not moving well. And it really starts to mess with how you perceive your own body and movement.
Yeah, it's almost like the analogy of when we feel some minor headaches or some sort of a body ache, you immediately go to WebMD and the diagnosis is terminal stage cancer. You're like,
every time.
You're like, what? I think I just had too much pizza last night, right? That's what it reminds me of. And it comes down to this timeless contention and this debate within the academic field in a clinical realm where is it the evidence-based practice, EBP, which is the golden standard, where evidence about evidence, everything is about, can it be replicated on the massive scale in terms of the standards of deviations and all that good stuff. But then the other side is, shouldn't it be practice-based, right? Because as you said, humans are not statistics. Humans are not going to always fit into this mold of academic norms, as you alluded to. How do you view this contention versus about adhering to this academic evidence always because it is scientism, or you're like, no, it should be individualized and personalized to each human needs because they're all different?
I understand standard deviation, and the majority of us are going to fit in this certain area where action should happen. I've never been in that majority in intelligence, in movement, in understanding, in life. We're talking practical application. I've always felt, whether good outside the norm or maybe fallen below the norm, I've never felt like I've been in that common majority. So it's nice having the academic background. It's great having the textbooks that explain what should and shouldn't happen. I've yet to actually meet somebody who falls within those guidelines. So these studies, a lot of these evidence-based practices on what should or shouldn't happen, when we break away from what the textbooks are saying and we go back to our basic skill set and understanding of observing what actually is in front of us, every single person needs to be treated individually. There could be uniform principles and practices that over a large population could provide some kind of change. But when it really comes down to it, I think the majority of us are actually outside what textbooks are saying the norm is, or what evidence-based practices are saying the norm is. And maybe that's just the kind of people that I have attracted, right? I don't attract the people who have a few chiropractic sessions and they're just great, they're good to go. I get the people where that stuff created some serious complications and problems. So maybe it's just the nature of my work that I attract the people where the common evidence-based practices, I don't want to say have failed them, but they just weren't right for them. Their body didn't adhere or adapt or react well to the practices because they were outside the norm. So I think what I've come is, because I specialize in what we could say the abnormal, it's very hard to live into the evidence-based practices because I see what they are not doing for the people who fall outside the norms, if that makes sense.
Yeah, and also in academic, it's the academic biases, right? Because a lot of the randomized controlled trials or peer-reviewed studies are very skewed demographics. A concrete example I think about is intermittent fasting. About 8 to 9 years ago, intermittent fasting it took America by storm. everyone and their mothers were doing 16-hour gap or 18-hour gap. And then a lot of women started doing it too. And then they found out that it's actually could be detrimental to your fertility ability. And they looked at the demographics of the trials and realized, oh, wait a minute. There's not a single female participants in the benefits of intermittent fasting. It was all male and all white.
It's fascinating.
So, right? So of course, it is still scientific, it's still peer reviewed, and it's still evidence. However, that evidence caters to specific demographics while overlooking a lot of other aspects of the demographics that also need help or could benefit from healing.
Yeah, I agree.
If you enjoy watching that video, click that side for the full-length episode. Hope you discover something new today and see you again next time. Thanks for watching.